Dear colleagues and guests, today is the 29th of June, 2020, 17 hours Moscow time, sharp. Let me declare open a session of the Dissertation Council in Defense of Thesis by Konson Grigoriy Rafaelyevich for the degree of Doctor of Culture Studies, Academic Specialization 240001, Theory and History of Culture, on the theme Manifestation of the Non-Self-Conception and Experience of Catastrophe in European artistic practices from the 15th to the 20th centuries. And immediately we start, I beg your pardon, we have to take a short technical break to establish sustainable connection with the colleague council members. The technical break will take 5 to 10 minutes. Please stay connected. Dear colleagues, I announce the technical break finished. Let us continue the defense session of Konson Grigoriy Rafaelyevich from the point where I introduced the Dissertation Council members because we had some technical issues. So to avoid any inaccuracies, let me introduce members of the Dissertation Council, and I ask the Dissertation Council to confirm that they can see and hear us, and also please say if you agree, if these technical issues continue today. So in that case, we shall ask the academic secretary of St. Petersburg University, Alexander Valentinovich Gniotov, to postpone our session to another date. So if you agree to postpone, please let us know. Me, Makovetsky, Evgeny Anatolovich, chairman of today's session, Alexeyeva Praksin Anatoly Mikhailovich, Doctor of Culture Studies at St. Petersburg University. Anatoly Mikhailovich, can you see, can you hear us? Yes, and yes, I don't mind the meeting postponed if necessary. Birukova Marina Valerina, Doctor of Culture Studies at St. Petersburg University. Marina Valerievna, can you see, can you hear us? Do you agree? Yes, good afternoon. Yes, I can see. Yes, I agree to have the session today or postpone if necessary. Grigoriy Alexander Samuilovich, Doctor of Culture Studies at St. Petersburg University. Alexander Samuilovich, I can see, I can hear you, I agree, if necessary. Maria Alexandrovna Burganova, Doctor of Art History, Stroganov, Moscow State Academy of Art and Industry. Maria Alexandrovna, can you see? Can you hear us? Yes, I can see and hear, and I agree. You seem Mark Arkadievich, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Institute of General History of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Can you see? Can you hear us, Mark Arkadievich? Yes, I can see and hear you, and I agree to do my best to complete our today's mission. Thank you, Mark Arkadievich. Wolfgang Masnak, Doctor of Philosophy, Beijing University. Wolfgang, can you see? Can you hear us now?
I can see you, I can hear you, and I think we should continue. Other day wouldn't be possible for me.
But we should have Simon Morrison, Princeton University, PhD. Okay, I can see, I can hear you, and I agree. Thank you, dear colleagues. Let me once again introduce our applicant, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich Konson. Can you see, can you hear us? And you agree. Thank you, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich. And the academic advisor of the applicant, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor, acting head of the Department of Russian Philosophy of St. Petersburg University, Evgeny Georgievich Sokolov. Evgeny Georgievich, are you with us? Evgeny Georgievich, please switch the microphone on. I can't hear you. Yes, now I can hear, I can see you, and I agree. Thank you, Evgeny Georgievich. Since technical failures may occur and our session is being held in remote access mode under the St. Petersburg University order, the 23rd of March, 2304/1, since so we want to avoid any technical failures, I would like to ask Anatoly Mikhailovich Alexey Akrasin, who's next on the list, to call a technical break if the connection with me is lost. So please, you can count on me. Thank you, Anatoly Mikhailovich. Dear colleagues, if you don't mind, let me continue. The session is being recorded and broadcast live at St. Petersburg University website. The speeches are being simultaneously translated from Russian into English and from English into Russian. The applicant's page currently displays an email address where all listeners of the live broadcast of the Dissertation Council session can ask questions. In due course, I shall announce these questions and the degree applicant will be able to answer. The only thing I ask the authors of these questions to give their full name, position, and job, and questions should be strictly related to the applicant's speech and his thesis. In accordance with the order of awarding at St. Petersburg University the degree of Candidate of Science or Doctor of Science approved by the local regulations of St. Petersburg University, hereinafter referred to as the order. As session, the Dissertation Council is considered competent if at least 2/3 of the approved composition of the Council, but not less than 4 persons, are present. Our Dissertation Council consists of 8 persons. All 8 are present. So, we have the quorum. I instruct the curator of today's defense head of the Dissertation Council Activity Support Department, Irina Vasilievna Alexeyeva, to draw up the attendance list in which the Dissertation Council members present shall be listed and to indicate their work mode, in this case remote. Let me set forth the procedure of today's session of the Dissertation Council. First, the chairman summary report on the main content of the documents submitted by the applicant and their compliance with the applicant regulations, answers to possible questions. 2, a brief report by the degree applicant outlining the key points of his study. 3, questions to the applicant strictly on his report. 4, answers of the applicant. 5, speeches of all members of the Dissertation Council in turn with their assessment of the thesis. 6, speech of the chairman and his review. 7, final answers of the applicant to questions asked. 8, presentation by the chairman of questions that came during the discussion and the live broadcast. 9, answers of the applicant. 10, speech of the academic advisor of the applicant. 11, discussion by the council members of the results of the defense session. 12, open individual voting. The votes shall be counted and the results shall be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. 13, a decision on awarding and not awarding the academic degree to the applicant. 14, closing remarks of the applicant. Dear colleagues, do you have any questions regarding the procedure? If you have no questions or objections, let's start running the procedure. The floor is given to the academic advisor of Konson Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor Sokolov Evgeny Georgievich. distinguished chairman, distinguished council members, I'm pleased to introduce Konson Grigoriy Rafaelyevich to you and his thesis, Catastrophe in the European Artistic Practices of the 15th, 20th centuries, written at the Institute of Philosophy of St. Petersburg University. The applicant has worked really hard. The results of his work are now presented to your attention. Thank you. Thank you, Evgeny Grigorievich, for introducing the degree applicant. Later, he'll be given the floor again to talk about other advantages of the applicant. Thank you. Let's take up the first item of our agenda, Chairman's summary report. The thesis by Konson. The thesis by Konson Grigoriy Rafaelyevich for the degree of Culture Studies, Academic Specialization 240001, Theory and History of Culture, on the theme Manifestation of a Non-Self-Conception and the Experience of Catastrophe in European Artistic Practices in the 16th, 20th centuries, accepted for defense by the order of the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University on the 27th of March 2020, number 2478/1. Konson Grigoriy Rafaelyevich wrote his thesis at St. Petersburg University under the guidance of Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor, Head of the Department of Russian Philosophy, Sokolov Evgeny Georgievich. The number of applicants' publications which set out the main scientific results of his thesis, according to the enclosed list, is 46. In peer-reviewed scientific journals from the list approved by the Ministry of Education and Science of the Russian Federation, 25 publications. In journals indexed in the scientometric databases Web of Science and Scopus, 17 publications. Besides, the applicant wrote 3 monographs on the theme of the thesis. The applicant submitted to the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University a full package of documents for acceptance of his thesis for consideration and defense. Dear colleagues, connection with Alexander Samoilovich is he's back. I can see, I can hear you. I just went away for a second. The technical break is over, dear colleagues. I beg your pardon. Let's continue our session. The degree applicant submitted a full package of documents for acceptance of his thesis for consideration and defense. All the documents comply with Article 12 of Section 3 of the Order. All the documents submitted by the applicant, according to the information I received from the curator, comply with the requirements and are kept in the applicant's attestation file. Copies are available from the office of the Dissertation Council Support Department. The Dissertation Council Support Department. Before I give the floor to the applicant, do you, dear council members, have any questions to the degree applicant regarding the documents, or maybe the list of his publications? No, there are no questions. If there are no questions, let us give the floor to the degree applicant, Konson Grigoriy Rafaelyevich. Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, you have a presentation. Thank you. The chairman, the council members, the colleagues and friends. In case, before I start, I'd like to ask you, can you all see and hear me? Yes, thank you. Let me briefly introduce to you my study, Manifestation of the Non-Self-Conception and the Experience of Catastrophe in the European Artistic Practices of the 15th, 20th centuries. The modern life of our society, different disastrous trends which currently became really significant and appear where world is threatened. Such message of being, of course, is eminently inherent in history of artistic European practices, now became a sign of modern love. That's why the analysis of catastrophe, explained by destructive stitches, became an urgent present phenomenon, which is closely related with the tragedy concepted, which, according to Berdyaev, always turn out to be moral, and the source of it is inside the decaying phenomenon and its insoluble self-splitting implementation, according to Alexei Losov. The idea of representation of the conceptual one is the non-self conception that took me to the study. So for over 20 years, I studied in different artistic practices. Over the time, I created my own analytic approach. The counter sensitivity by Lev Vygotsky, which he used for in psychology and later developed by one of his followers, by Sergei Eisenstein. The result of my studies became the non-self conception, dialectically the opposite of the I am concept of William James, which, when his personality developed further, the formula appears just like with James, but under the negative sign, where the main ones are failures that don't mean completion of claims. Therefore, in the problem of non-self-conception, we shall be interested in discuss conflict expectations and the reachability. The foundation here is the ethical and psychological conflict, which is not resolved, but reaches deeper stages, characterized by human failure from duty, and the fact that in art practices, new times, as a deal with the devil, bolded with purchase of human soul. This product, which, though applies to sacred ones in human life, in real life, as agreement of with the criminal community, similar twist, unlike the I conception, where is based on the man and his soul, in the core of no self concept. The center turns out to be a man without a soul, the place of which is taken by the devil. In philosophy, culture studies, psychology, and art studies, the concept of the non-self conception as a moral psychological conflict is absent. Therefore, the object of my study was artistic practices which recorded the non-self conception and specific artistic artifacts, which is catastrophe of a personality which has broken the law, who lives in two worlds, the real and unreal, where his self periodically talks to his clone, non-self. So what the purpose of my research is to study characteristics, the phenomenal experience catastrophe in European art practices of the 15th, 20th centuries in relation with the non-self conception. To achieve this purpose, I set myself a number of tasks. First, to identify different types of theoretical fixation of self and non-self in the history of philosophical and cultural studies. To prove the experience of objectification of non-self and self in reality turns out to be an output and crystallization of the non-self concept, which has been registered by art practices and artifacts. Identify the philosophical and cultural grounds for reveal the author's projection of the non-self conception. 5, prove that pinning the author's non-self conception happens in the category of cultural studies. 6, argue fixation in artistic practices, 5 types of them: literature, painting, sculpture, music, and cinema, the feeling of non-self conception. To track how the idea is received theoretical fixation. 8, explore the typical conflicts based on the non-self conception, interpersonal, and the circle conflict of the passion type. 9, select an invariant phenomena of the non-self conception and its variations in art practices. Justify the fact that the feeling of catastrophe is a true feature of the non-self. Sources used in my thesis are aimed at clarification of the main mechanism, denial of one's self. This duality based on the concepts of Uvarova, on the conflict of Christ and Antichrist, detects different aspects of binarism in European intellectual tradition of Aristotle, Plato, Vermeer, Albert the Great, Abelard, Martin Luther, Nicholas Cousin, Shaftesbury, Pascal, Galliens, Schelling, Spengler, Bedensky, Jung, and Christopher. This philosophic and cultural cross-section found its development, the study of philosophers, James, Freud, Rogers, Frank, Frankl, Zimmel, and others. Significant contribution to the interdisciplinary understanding is made by Lotman. Is also studied by Levitt, Gordon, Asinovska, Nekeshina, Kantor, Korotkov, Drukanova, Barusa, Andreeva, and others. Overall, the binary personality type is not self and non-self, but also in the context of ethical, religious as entities, where makes it a full-fledged philosophical conception. Therefore, in connection with understanding this phenomena, this non-self concept as a non-self concept developed in the catastrophic situation of the author of the work of art. Consciousness of the hero when the disaster approaches determined the choice of most suitable artistic works. For chapter 1, I selected 6 literary works, 5 Russian, Dostoevsky's novel, The Karamazov Brothers, Chekhov's story, The Black Monk, Bulgakov's Master Margarita, and 3 foreign, Dorian Gray by Wilde, Chagrin's Balzac, and Dr. Faustus by Thomas Mann. The specific image of devil told us to choose Bosch paintings at Bruegel, Franz Hals, Jan Steen, Jorst Dropskloff, Adrian van Ostade. But stories were created with a pinch of irony and grotesque. The paintings of Bosch and Bruegel found a relation in a really grotesque type of thinking, not in canvases, but systematically in most of their works. Therefore, with the general archetype grotesque of non-self-contact, there's a big potential detection of varieties. Works of Michelangelo, such as Jean Goujon, Descent from the Cross, I chose to show the genre of Pietà, which became a core of the non-self concept. It doesn't take the first place and doesn't enter into conflict with self, but it is a basic semantic collapse form, the conflict with the crowd, which became the prologue of the story of Christ. The Christological system is embedded semantic of the conflict. I studied the works of sculptures where the non-self conception, but because the grotesque direction in sculpture in the 15th and 16th century was not yet typical, I selected those masters who took up this trend. One was Judas Kiss. So this subject was very common, maybe less common in sculpture. and in the manifestation of the non-self concept, not only gestures, but also looks were important. I found such works in Stoss. This subject was not chosen by accident. This is not a standard situation, but a psychological state of the hearers. Can be specifically shown as a intervening self and non-self conceptions. So the blissful interpretation is this tapas is based on the image of self and non-self conceptions, where suffering Christ is getting peace, and the angry crowd falls into the state of horror of the situation. Such images I found in the work of Luca della Robbia and Adriano del Brocca. The embodiment of execution of John the Baptist is quite typical for iconography and painting. Bernardino Luini, Masaccio, Sandra Botticelli, Titian, Derisi, Caravaggio. But for sculpture, that was a fairly rare topic, such as the works of Vincenzo Dante from Bargello Museum. However, though the theme is tragic, here it never reaches the level of grotesqueness like Verrocchio, Donatello, and unknown master of the 16th century at a Hermitage Museum, where the non-self-conception is displayed in an unbelievably disastrous way. In other cases, I wanted to show not only the catastrophe. Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, Evgeny Anatolievich, please announce a technical break. Please call it technical break. Alexander Samoilovich is missing again. The technical break is over. Unfortunately, one of the council members, Alexander Samoilovich Dricker, he will join us when he can, but unfortunately, because of such circumstances, he will not be able to vote. But he may still take part in the okay. I beg your pardon, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich. Let's continue your report. Thank you, Evgeny Anatolovich. I was saying of Tapas, the execution of John the Baptist, though the theme is tragic itself. And here it doesn't reach such a degree of grotesque, such as Verrocchio, Donatello, and unknown masters of the 16th century, where their non-self concept is really grotesque. In other cases, I wanted to demonstrate the link with victorious and triumphant. So I chose David, not only the same type of Dantelism, but Verrocchio, to show how, despite on the scale discrepancy, the non-self can compete with self. The third chapter is dedicated to music, for the study of which I used a number of profile sources. There's different genres. The first, oratorios, with name The Conception of Soul and Body by Emilio de Cavalieri, as ideal from the point of self-concept. There's Josiah of Giacomo Carisi. It's a step away from the philosophical thinking to human studies. So the tragic manifestation is the antipode of the self-concept of Cavalieri. The two next sections are dedicated to the study of Handel as an outstanding tragic composer. It's Bible themes from position of Lutheran vision of the world. He was able to idealize his genre, and then within his genre to pose various manifestations of the non-self concept. The last 2 sections are dedicated to Tchaikovsky and Shostakovich and their tragic fantasy Romeo and Juliet. Is the only piece where Shostakovich uses 2 concepts, worldly love and love of God. This is the only piece in which he translates catastrophe, the non-self concept. Such repression it enabled me to study Grigoriy Kozintsev in the final sections of chapter 3. To be and not to be is a projection of the interaction of self and non-self conceptions, makes it out loud and in keen layer. This question is hidden. As a result of our study, preliminary as a general classification of the type of the non-self conception, which in the future can be updated. First is the Christological self-concept, ideal, antichrist non-self concept, which has the following subtypes: Old and New Testament antichrist concept, sacrificial, antichrist, and absurd or devil's non-self concept. Fourth, repressive antichrist non-self concept, apocalyptic. The scientific novelty and the results of the thesis are in the following. First, we identify various theoretical fixations of self and non-self conception in mine and the other. In history of philosophy and culture studies, introduced the conception of non-self, which has heuristic significance and bears the transmissive function of the author's catastrophe experience. Second, I proved that the experience of objectivation, of separation from non-self from self, in reality, is exit and crystallization of the non-self conception from the self conception. Third, identified the philosophical and cultural basis for catastrophe complex we define as a non-self conception. We trace how the conflict is theoretically recorded in philosophy and culture studies, demonstrated a system of conflicts, which is a structure and mechanism of the non-self conception, interpersonal, and the so-called conflict of the passion type. 5, we proved that the author's non-self conception is recorded in the privileged sphere of culture studies as 5 types: literature, painting, sculpture, music, and cinema. 6, we identify the invariant of the non-self conception and its variations in artistic practices. We justify the fact that the sense of catastrophe is 8. We demonstrate that translators of the non-self concepts is infernal images and their markers, which act as criminals. Provisions set for defense. The non-self concept is a concept which reflects the fundamental ontological, anthropological teachings. The second, the essence of the non-self conception is characterized by the ethics and philosophical projection of own and the other in the author's reaction to catastrophic events in life, leading through the catastrophe, which forms specific attitude to reality, which is recorded in the phenomenal catastrophe. In artistic practices of non-self-conception becomes the space for artistic being. 4, the basis of the structural semantic invariant of the non-self-conception is the claim for success and excessiveness. 5, the representative field for the non-self-conception is the art in sign artifacts of the epoch. Introduction of the non-self-conception in artistic practice, the privileged sphere of culture, is necessary for comprehensive study. Conflict inbuilt in the structure and semantics of the non-self-conception as the constituted basis, the dynamic mechanism of development of artistic works of art. personification, artistic practices of ontological, anthropological constants of the non-self has specific differences, verbal in literature, visual in painting and sculpture, audio in music, synthetic types of artistic practices, music, theater, and verbal, audio, and visual. Here we talk not about the formal presence of instruments as a particular type of art, but that their non-self-conception is coded in audiality, visuality, and verbality. In general, the non-self-conception is focused on awakening own individuation of its meaning. Such focus is focus on transmission, positive sense of the author's reflection on catastrophic in life, which in the end can strengthen the protective belt of the noosphere of mind and pneumosphere spirit. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, do you have questions to the degree? If you have any questions to the degree applicant, we can ask them now. Marina Valerievna Birukova. Marina Valerievna, please. Thank you. Dear Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, the transition in inferno of a person in sphere of infernal or demonization. Though you avoid this aspect, this is a negative transition. Can you give an example of a transition with a positive sign, maybe in the 20th century literature, from a fallen angel, if you may say? Dear Marina Valerievna, thank you for your question. If we talk about inversion, inversion of sense from a fallen angel back into an angel, we can look at various movie projects. Seldom we see good films where he was all bad and then turns to be all good, where he was a complete fallen angel and then became a complete angel. So maybe we may talk about the spiritual growth of an individual, and there's quite a number of examples, or maybe some angels manifestations. For example, let's look at Legion movie, maybe not very popular, but with very sophisticated plot, where the main hero is the carrier without herself knowing, being pregnant with the savior, because God decided to destroy not the demon, but God decided to show to the man his place and then try again. So that's a very interesting inversion, where an ideal, positive, absolute, and it's such a set of tools. So angels become carriers of what is prohibited by God's laws, and people, Gabriel or Michael, Archangel Michael, who refuses to obey God's orders. He goes against. He wants to save humankind. There are many comedies, for example, Dogma, where Ben Affleck and others, the immaculate nature of God is questioned. So here I can give quite a number of examples like this. I don't want to take too much time, and I can give you more examples. So maybe I can think of more examples during our discussion. Thank you. But you gave a very thorough answer. Thank you. Maria Alexandrovna, sorry to keep you waiting. Thank you. Well, I wanted that at certain periods of time, history of Europe turns tragic because of wars, epidemics, different types of tragedy, of drama. And now suddenly your thesis on the which is a study of the tragic, and once again Europe turned tragic. Reached a tragic point in its history because of social issues and because of the virus. Will, in the light of today's life, you wrote your thesis for a long time. You've been working on it for a long time. At this stage, you can test the tragic history of Europe, the concept, or will your position change, or you feel that your position got more evidence? Thank you, Maria Alexandrovna, for your very interesting question. I would say talking about the future is useless because the world is changing so fast and not changing for the better. But my position, as it seems to me, at least in some features, is connected with such devaluation of world's values. Let me say that it will be very interesting to take this work to empirical spheres and trace and interview people in different countries. If they are ready, people are ready to sacrifice the value of their personality, how his self-assessment changes. Is he successful, and at that he feels that he's worth nothing, and up to the point how his health changes, and how the spirit of the nation, or maybe the feeling of the nation, of humankind changes, deteriorates. So that would be interesting. So I'd answer your question as follows. Though it's hard to give a definite yes or no. I think on the one hand, the conception, in my opinion, resonates with what is happening. And on the other hand, it would be interesting to take it to a scientific foundation to prove some considerations in the limelight of the events mentioned by you. That is my answer. Thank you. Maria Alexandrovna, are you satisfied? Yes, thank you. There is one more question from Simon Morrison, who speaks brilliant Russian. I will read questions sent by Simon. Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, how would you compare the non-self-conception with the Bakhtin's discourse theory? Thank you very much. Thank you, Simon, for your, as always, interesting question. Bakhtin, in general, analyzes the aesthetic function of works of art. He thinks it's necessary to look at oneself through the eyes of others to understand the transgredient to your own consciousness, to see the reflection in oneself. And Bakhtin analyzed So where some basic concepts of personality were shown in sarcastic variant. For example, if we talk, let me give you an example. The decomposition of Ivan Karamazov's consciousness is to replicas of the devil, where the difference exists only in the tone and accent, and here talking about his other. He has his own term. He even has a term for that. This is a very interesting question. So sorry for this lengthy answer. As Bakhtin says, between someone who looks into a mirror and his spirit, I self for the others, there is a connection in the transfer of subjective into the realm of objective. So here is this door for the devil opens, because so in general the theme of a relation of Bakhtin is very complex, and he looked at tools, he looked at representations, how it is developed, and in relation with this, I would say that through the other, through this alienation or objectivation of one's self through non-self, we touch upon with the non-self conception. So maybe my answer, I can, of course, so if necessary, I can try to give other examples to answer your question. Thank you, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich. Simon, are you satisfied with the answer? Yes. Wolfgang, what is your question? Please, you had a question, right?
Yes, I have a question.
In
your thesis, you're focusing on the non-self. That sounds like an antithesis to Western psychology, which is focusing very much on the self. If we discuss your position, your research from a cross-cultural perspective, for example, from Eastern Asia, from China, from Japan, we see that the self is totally different to the self in Europe. So my question to you, on the basis of your thesis, do you think in cross-cultural psychology and psychiatry, we should rethink the concept of the self and perhaps more profoundly integrate what you have found, the non-self?
Thank you for this valuable and interesting question, to which I can, so I'll try to give a short answer. Look here, in the Oriental tradition, the non-self theory, it has a different meaning, or a totally different meaning. This is a no self theory. And Al-Bakhali, who writes about this, one of the latest publications by Dalai Lama, some of the and others respected colleagues, they consider from this position the complete not sacrificing your principles. This is a different conception altogether, but refusing your desires to achieve nirvana, this special state. And of course, naturally, this is an independent for several centuries or thousands of years line of thought. As for the interaction, that's a very interesting idea. I did not dare working within the Western intellectual tradition with Christian values to introduce to cross-cultural comparison, but in the future that would be a very valuable idea, and maybe somehow it will be possible on using the natural scientific approach. It will be possible to somehow combine and complement, maybe in complement both conceptions. But this is the task for the future. Thank you. I hope I answered your question. Thank you very much, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich. Questions? I think we have no questions at this point. Thank you, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich. I have a question to the Dissertation Council members. Approximately half of the time. Do we need a technical break at this point? No, we don't. No, we don't need a break. No. Okay. Well, Mark Arkadievich, you're okay? Okay. Then let us continue our session and let us proceed to reviews of the Let me ask Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, how would you prefer to answer? Would you like to answer all reviews at once or one by one? Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, please switch your microphone on. Beg your pardon. Evgeny Anatolievich, with your permission, I would prefer to answer all questions in the end. That would take less time because some remarks and questions can be similar. Thank you, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich. So then I will ask with external reviews we received, and the reviews have been published at St. Petersburg University website at the applicants page. So anyone interested could have read them. So I shall limit myself to reading only questions and critical remarks, if that's okay. Thank you. Then I'll proceed. So totally, we received 5 reviews, external reviews. Let me name the authors and read their comments. So the first review was sent by Lavrenova Olga Alexandrovna, Doctor of Philosophy, Candidate of Geographical Sciences, Senior Researcher, Institute of Scientific Information on Social Sciences, the Russian Academy of Sciences, Professor of Steel Institute, Professor of Institute of Cinema and Television, Honorary Member of the Russian Academy of Sciences, President of the International Association of Semiotics of Space and Time, and critical remarks. I will proceed before I forget. So all the reviews are positive, and the review by Olga Alexandra is also positive. And by why you don't touch upon alter ego theory? As every soul has a bright part that belongs to God. As the internal conflict in this case is not confrontation between positive soul and the devil, but a struggle between sinful soul and God. Of course, in a world of art practice, this theme is not as common. This is the critical remark. The second next review was sent by Parsarian Natalia Tigranovna, Doctor of Philological Science, Professor of History, Foreign Literature of Moscow State University, and Dr. also Vice President of the International Association of the Study of the 17th Century, President of the Russian Society for the Study of the 18th Century, a member of the International Crebillon Society, member of the Scientific Commission of Russian Academy for the Study of Creative Heritage of Goethe. And her critical remark is quite long, and I have to read all of it. I will focus on what requires some clarification. First of all, binary opposition was formed not in the Mannerist literature of the 16th century, as the author says on page AF48, but much earlier by Levi-Strauss, and whose works the author knows very, as many other philosophers, culturologists, critics correctly say that the binary opposition existed in ancient world. The basis of the world mythology. These oppositions can be found both in medieval literature. For example, Kazakova, a PhD thesis, analyzes the binary oppositions of the novelists. The same can be said about duality, which appeared for the first time not in Romanticism, but at least in the literature of Baroque, was filled with tragic meaning. Perhaps the author should have clarified the clarity of romantic duality in comparison with its earlier forms. The image of this duality is filled with tragic meaning. The binary opposition become antinomies, collide with irreconcilable contradictions. This is probably a sign of culture and literature of the new age, and above all of Romanticism. Accordingly, there is the evolution of the image of the devil. It's a pity the author missed a very important book by French scientist Mouchen Blade, Essays on the History of the Devil, the 16th and 20th centuries. The history of Faustin plot is accurately described. So I'd like to advise Grigoriy Rafaelyevich in the future to pay attention to sources missing from his bibliography. Natalia mentions Yakusheva, Stepanova, and Dobrokotov. These works could significantly expand the analysis of Goethean, post-Goethean development and literature and culture of the last century and introduce interesting and new nuances to this analysis and the non-self-conception. So this is the comment of Natalia Tigranovna, but in general, this comment does not affect, and her overall impression is positive. The next review by Razlogov Kirill Emilievich, Doctor of Cultural Studies, Professor of Cinema Institute, head of President of the Guild of Film Critics of Russia, President of the Institute of Cultural Studies, honored artist of the Russian Federation. Kirill Emilievich says the following. That would be interesting to include in the description the catastrophe processes is from the death to Sofia Gabaydulina. Here, animated films could be of particular interest. The next review from Ryzhov Boris Nikolaevich, Doctor of Psychology, Head of Department of Pedagogical Age and Social Psychology at Moscow State Pedagogical University, Chairman of the Editorial Board of Journal Psychology and Sociology, winner of the Russian Government Prize, honorary worker of higher education of the Russian Federation. Boris Nikolaevich made no critical remarks. His review is 100% positive. And the last review was submitted by Salnikova Ekaterina Viktorovna, Doctor of Cultural Studies, candidate of Art History, head of the Sector of Artistic Problems of Mass Media of State Institute of Art Studies. And so here are her critical remarks. We doubt the use of the term criminal to certain characters in so can we really describe infernal characters as criminals? Because authors in many cases they have a different, more comprehensive, more complex opinion. So this definition sounds too strong for infernal characters. So these were the 5 positive external reviews, and maybe Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, you will take these questions in the end. Let's do that now. Let's proceed to let's hear reviews of the Dissertation Council members. I will give the floor in the order our names appear in, and the only exception, since our reviews were also published at university websites, so maybe we'll just focus on critical remarks and their conclusion, whether the author deserves or does not deserve. Mark Arkadievich, what do you think? Yes, we are. Yeah, that's okay. We are okay. Simon, are you okay with that? Yes, I am. Okay. I have a question. Mark Arkadievich, you will read. No. You are present. So council members will read their reviews themselves. And I see one thing, since Alexander Samoilovich could not join us, I shall read his review. So we are all agreeing. We shall just read the questions and critical remarks. So dear colleagues, let me give the floor to Alexey Apraxin, Anatoly Mikhailovich. Anatoly Mikhailovich, can you hear us? Yes. Evgeny Anatolyevich. You may speak Russian. Your speech will be translated. Good evening, dear colleagues. I'm so happy to be. It's an honor for me to be online, to be in touch with you. My participation I was invited by Evgeny Georgievich to take part, and of course it was interesting for me to watch online defense session, and I find the non-self conception very interesting. As I study cultures of the West and the East, I noticed many times that the visions of the world in quest for meaning and in answers from Pythagore to Sartre, Heidegger, and Baudrillard, Berlioz. So it was very interesting for me. Thanks to Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, it's very interesting to learn about representation of the non-self conception. Wolfgang in his question touched upon this in his question, it seemed to me. And here, despite my great respect and admiration of the success of the author, I felt my expectations were not met. So when I came to Oslo in 1992, I saw a disc which was called Nirvana, and when I listened to this music, it had nothing to do with Nirvana, it was hard rock and grunge mixture, very noisy. Nirvana, it actually took Nirvana band to success. Has it taken anyone closer to Nirvana? And with due respect, having all respect to Grigoriy Rafaelyevich work, I think the main concept of the thesis, the non-self-conception, is bad because this phrase is used a lot in Oriental studies, and as marked by thousands of years of intellectual reflections in India, China, Mongolia, Japan, Korea, where Buddhism is common, and meaning and connotations are absolutely different from what the author put. And according to the traditional belief, the concept of I is the main problem, which brings suffering to living beings by self-distractions, self-illusion, and other essences, which are sources of evil, ignorance. And in manifestation of non-self conception means freeing personality, stopping perceiving reality, and from Oriental philosophy, the concept introduced by the author deludes the reader as the disc which I mentioned, because the term he uses is well known, but the author gives a totally different explanation to what everybody knows. The author is talking not about the absence of self, but of some twin mythology. Is since we are discussing culture studies here, and on this basis, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich analyzes the works of Chekhov, Dostoevsky, Bulgakov, Balzac, Gogol, Wildman, and based on Vygotsky, analyzes paintings, the works of Bosco and Bruegel, and then composers, directors. It's very interesting. The thesis is very interesting. Yes, I agree. But for me, the plot in painting is irrelevant. Yet this move enables the author to create portraits of various people, to reconstruct the inner world of the artist, to study the behavior of the feeling of catastrophe in artistic practices of the 15th and 20th century. What surprised me in this work, the simplicity of dualistic move in the modern cultural discourse characterized by sophisticated transculturality and interdisciplinarity. It's quite unusual to come across a scientific concept based on the paradigm of the struggle of the good and the evil, of heavenly and devils. Such explanation of the world looks very archaic to me. At some point, I thought maybe I'm reading a thesis in theology, but though the author talks about the modern times, he talks about the history of culture and uses his conception as a tool that can be used to interpret European literature and Russian literature. Such move, in my opinion, selected authors often relied on this as the basis. So, investment situation suddenly turns quite adequate and methodologically true, though, in my opinion, in the modern world, such an approach can be applied only to the works of mass culture, such as TV series, etc., because this simple formula, self-esteem means success divided by claims, but with the use of it, the author finds key to new dualistic interpretations of many beloved works. Yuri Rafaelyevich has worked very hard to test his conception on various materials. Looks very convincing to me. So my main critical remarks related to propositions 9, 10, and 11 set for defense, which you have all read. For example, proposition 9 says that a non-self conception in literature is carried out through verbality. We have already heard the answer to this objection, which occurred not only to me. It happens so that literature explains every concept verbally, music audibly, etc., and painting visually. So if we take as the basis the mythology of art, which exists since the 18th century, so nothing has changed here since the time of Lessing. There is no novelty in this proposition. The work is interesting. Deep analysis of specific themes of familiar works. The study of the hero's stay in two worlds on a wide historical field spanning 500 years of European histories illustrate this sense of catastrophe. In general, I think that the thesis corresponds to the requirements of academic specialization, and the culture of history of cultural beliefs is also historical continuity of cultural values. So development of culture, personality in culture, norms in culture, all these themes the author touches upon. So I think the thesis of Grigoriy Rafaelyevich Konson, manifestation of the non-self conception and experience of a catastrophe and the European artistic practice of the 15th, 20th century, by its structure, theme, practical application corresponds to the academic specialization requirements set by St. Petersburg University Order on the 1st of September 2016 on the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And generally speaking, despite my critical remarks and my personal chagrin and false expectations regarding the non-self concept, by all this criteria, considering the merits, as already a doctor of art history, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich Konson deserves to be awarded this degree also. Doctor of Culture Studies of St. Petersburg University, and I wish him to continue his work. Thank you, Anatoly Mikhailovich. Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, you will answer all the questions in the end, I remember. But I So you heard everything. Yes, I heard everything. We had some issue with sound, but but now I was able to understand everything. Okay, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, thank you. Thank you once again, Anatoly Mikhailovich. Next review by Marina Valerievna Bidukova. Marina Valerievna, welcome. Dear colleagues, because since my review was published at the University of Epsom, I will just show some regrets. The impressive picture of revolution of the catastrophe concept in European literature and music, which coincides with the sense of catastrophe of being, which became more acute. The modern art is missing. The author study or reviews art of the destruction, opposition of form, and is division of art and body was very significant. And the soul and body, ideas and forms, respectively, since the Middle Ages, leads to the internal discord that the author interprets as their experience of the catastrophe, compared with the worldview of antiquity, with its belief and anthropomorphism of gods and the lack of emphasis on polarity of good and evil, the ratio which is justified by pragmatic rationality in the Middle Ages. The division into divine and satanic is a systematic factor of culture, starting from the fall described in the Bible. Division into good and evil dictates actions, attitudes. Duality requires certain separation of the concepts, anthropomorphic forms, the beauty of body from the evil. The spirit requires ideal symbolic form. Here, the basis of art is the emaciated body of crucified Christ, which Boris Groys interprets as the death of art in the 20th century, where crucifixion is the death of art, with briefly catastrophic is reflected by the death not only of fast-changing style, but the death of artistic form. A Spengler sense coincides with belief of catastrophe. But in general, the author brilliantly demonstrates succession connection of catastrophe of life and cultural torture of the modern times, which leads to modernism based on reflection. Should be mentioned that this comment as future of catastrophic does not affect the overall positive impression of the thesis, and I thank for an excellent report. I thank the author. That's all. Thank you, Marina Valerievna. The next review, Alexander Samuelovich Dricker. I will read the final part of his review. Drawbacks of the work are connected with the courage of the author. Is a traditional view in the world in the 20th century. 5 out of 12 propositions, truly staggering courage, according to each specification of the non-self-conception literatures performed by verbality, independence, culture, visuality, and in music manifests itself in odality. The religion, even the Soviet period of history, was of great importance, the great part of the society. Despite these claims, the thesis by Konson, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, manifestation, the non-self-conception, the experience of catastrophe in European artistic practice in the 15th, 20th centuries corresponds to the basic requirements set by the order, the 1st of September 2016, 6821/1, on the order of awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the applicant, Konson Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, deserves to be awarded the degree of Doctor of Culturology, Academic Specialization 24001, Cultural Studies. Article 11 of the above mentioned has not been violated by the author. Council, Dissertation Council member, Alexander Samuelovich Dricker. Next, let us continue. Maria Alexandrovna Burganova. You can hear me, right? I don't have any critical remarks. I just wanted to draw attention to some missing details. The author many times is talking about the passions of Christ, using Flemish art as his material, but the sufferings of Christ, the author never mentions. A very specific subject from his torture sandals, which you may see in paintings. Sculpture is very common in the Flemish art of the 15th, 16th centuries. This theme, of course, is not included in the traditional list of Christi. This is apocryphal. It's definitely apocryphic. But the those torture sandals could have given to the researcher additional information about the combination of high and mass culture and manifestation of the non-self concept in this border realm. In his analysis, the author often focuses, he likes Basque and Bruegel. He's talking about them a lot. He's talking how they broke through into the future, but the prospects of this future, the author does not describe. It would be interesting to see the author's description of the main trends. There is a number of editorial can make some editorial corrections. I'm human and nothing human is nice. This is not, this was not said by Karl Marx, but I think that these comments are insignificant, and with such massive use of the works of art during such an extensive time period, of course, there's a lot to discuss, and this can. So, though, despite my critical comments, I think the thesis by Grigoriy Rafaelyevich Konson corresponds to the requirements set by the order and awarding academic degrees in St. Petersburg University, and the degree applicant definitely deserves to be awarded the degree of Doctor of Culture Studies in Theory of History of Culture. Thank you. Mark Arkadievich Yusim, could you please read a thought? Mark Arkadievich, I switched the microphone on. Dear colleagues, dear Evgeny Anatolovich, unfortunately, I cannot fully meet your request because I have mixed my review, the mixture of positive and negative impressions. So I will not read my full review, which is very long, and the author fully deserves it. But let me give some considerations briefly, as briefly as possible. I think that in the end, defense of the thesis is not only about approval or denial of the result. The discussion is very important. It was very interesting for me to hear speeches of my colleagues. The question and answer session got new ideas. First of all, I'd like to say that indeed the idea of the thesis is massive. It addresses a number of classical works of different genres, and the author attempted to generalize these works by different authors, works of art, paintings, sculpture, within the framework of the non-self conception. And I got some ideas that here we come across a number of complex points. Any generalizations in the sphere of humanities are difficult, and they lead to schematism. But I think Grigoriy Rafaelyevich was fully aware that he's not creating something absolutely universal, but he, in the broad framework of his study, he selected works which more or less agree with his conception, and the complex conclusion that he has read, it would be hard, but the focus of transmission. This is the author's it shows author's understanding of individuality of each work of art. The second difficulty, which I mentioned in my review, you can read about it in more detail, is the phenomenon itself, the basic phenomenon of human culture and psychology, is the opposition of self and non-self in the human consciousness. The issue of individuality, which has not been resolved, and I'm not sure it can be resolved at all. And the concept suggested by Grigoriy Rafaelyevich is only one way of interpreting this issue, this duality. He's trying to unite different approaches from psychology, philosophy, and even medicine. And this approach has its advantages and disadvantages, but the main thing is that self and non-self or one leads to another. So there is no clear opposition of self or non-self in the human mind. I would even say that the man cannot perceive his self, not understanding it as non-self without objectivating it. The entire world is self and non-self, and if we exclude the entire world from ourselves, there will be nothing left. So these two concepts are in complex relation. So representing them like this in the light of religious dualism is rather simplistic. And this complexity you can feel while reading the thesis. And thirdly, the third thing which I wanted to mention is about about the nature of art, what the author thinks about his work. Of course, there's always some kind of conception, but art is a special form of perception of the world and of one's self. So whatever we know about Bruegel or Dostoevsky's ideas of the creator, we judge the work of art. The final result of the final work of the artist is always different from what he wanted to say, and is a different form of sensual perception of the world rather than simple description. It is connected with the tasks listed, generalizing different opinions, creating some formulas that express the ideas in these works, the task is quite arguable. And the big part of my review, which I cannot discuss in detail now, is dedicated to the first part of the thesis, which Grigoriy Rafaelyevich described as the verbal description of his conception. And here in my review, I said that here there's specific selection. We see a specific selection of works which agree with the initial scheme, such as gives just one example. Speaking of Dostoevsky, such a novel as Crime and Punishment is very favorable from the point of analysis of self and non-self. For the understanding of the main character, of his behavior, is the author does not use it, but analyzes the Karamazov brothers in details, because here the satanic or mystic dualism is very prominent in the Christian religion. Not necessarily, of course, there are many different interpretations, and the image of Ivan Karamazov, who sees the devil as the representation of the non-self, it agrees with the conception, but unfortunately I discuss many of these works in my review. But what else would I like to say? There was an interesting question about the positive or image of a fallen angel. Of course, there are such images, a lot of them, because every artist has his own approach, his own vision, and the fallen angel himself is not the opposition of self and non-self, conventionally good and conventionally bad. Look at Lermontov's Demon. It's a very very appealing. Or Bulgakov's novel, which Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, here the devil is not all bad. This is the beginning that wants to make evil and makes good. But there are some comic images in folk art, in Pushkin's works, if we talk about this duality, this opposition of the heavenly and the evil. So maybe I will not take much more of your time. What I would like to say is that my critical remarks are very specific, and in addition to what I said now, these comments are mostly deal with some historic inaccuracies, such as mixture of Cowell and Phillips, the numbers, and there are some more specific comments about the interpretation of Bruegel's epoch and Bosque's epoch, Italian names, etc. If Grigoriy Rafaelyevich wants to take up these specific comments, I'm sure he has read them. He will simply give his arguments, so I will not bother you with these critical remarks. And in conclusion, I'd like to talk about my general conclusion. I think that the task set by Grigoriy Rafaelyevich set for himself to study the manifestation of the experience of catastrophe, he achieved he demonstrated that his conception reflects some significant features of a number of works of different genres. He has worked very hard. I think that is obvious to everybody. And most importantly, as I said, this work, as any other scientific work, makes the reader think and explore. And during our discussion, I thought maybe there is the weak point of this work. Maybe the author should not have combined the non-self conception and catastrophe. I now think that these are two different things. Maybe the author should have limited his study to catastrophe, the sense of catastrophe, but an idea of qualifications according the degree of Doctor of Culture Studies. I will not read the entire text, and generally speaking, my review is positive. Thank you, Mark Arkadievich. Let us continue. I'd like to give the floor to Professor Wolfgang Mastak. Wolfgang, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you very much indeed. So first of all, thank you, Grigoriy, for giving me the chance to get insights to your really deep and profound research, which for me was somehow a discovery of a new aspect, of a very profound aspect of the Western culture. That was absolutely enriching, and it was absolutely fantastic. So from this point of view, my critical remarks are not meant to be a criticism. They are rather meant to be a suggestion for further research, for cross-cultural research. So to be precise, a main critical focus concerns the language, semiotics, semantics, and the cultural background. For example, you refer to Heidegger, you refer to Schelling, you refer focusing on Schelling to the thirst of self-love. So I think for cross-cultural discussion, it would be important to ask, what was that time in Germany? Self-love, why was it important? How has that to do with the streams, with the perspectives of philosophy that time? That leads us to a broader perspective, to a broader spectrum. And I would like to focus now, and I did that also in my review, focus on two aspects. The first aspect is the experience of the catastrophe. I found it really fantastic how you explored from the perspective of the arts, of the culture, what is a catastrophe? What is experience? What does experience mean? And also today, when we face a pandemic, which is very hard for the whole globe, how can the arts help us to cope with problems? For centuries, the arts have given us a path, have given us somehow a guideline, and offered possibilities of solution. Once again, back, and I represent a Chinese university today. Catastrophe. What is that? If you take Taoism, which is very strong in China, in Taoism we do not have really a catastrophe. Taoism says that everything is changing, and modification is the only principle which is stable in the universe. So catastrophe in the Western aspect has something to do with a crash, with destruction, but from the perspective of Taoism, of China, there is no catastrophe. There is a modification, there's a transformation, there is a continuous transformation, and we take that. So I think, or I wish, I hope so, that your research work and research in Chinese cultural philosophy could inspire, could promote cross-cultural perspectives. Also today, it's totally clear. Also today, I have a lot to do in China with oncology and psycho-oncology. With COVID-19, they, even being Buddhist or even being Taoist, they were afraid of that, and they saw a certain catastrophe. So I think one critical point, or not really critical point, a suggestion, would be to join different philosophical and cultural backgrounds and to discuss in a next step what is experience, personal experience of catastrophe. The second point I would like to focus on is already very early in your thesis, you were focused on psychological terms, on pathopsychological terms, for example, neurosis. In the bigger frame of neurosis, you also discussed hallucination. In the West, hallucination, in the frame of psychiatry, has to do with schizophrenia. You showed us in your thesis that hallucination is more than that modern diagnosis of schizophrenia. If we take China, if we would take the idea of reincarnation, there might be a hallucination from an earlier life. So I think I'm dealing a lot today with cross-cultural psychiatry, especially between China and the West. And I think your research, your cultural research, is of extremely high value for those discussions. There is a huge problem joining Western psychiatry and psychiatry of Eastern Asia. And we definitely need perspectives, we need insights that you have given us and have given somehow the world, and to open our perspectives. So when I mention some critical remarks, please do not take it as criticism, just take it as an invitation to go on and to nourish cross-cultural, interdisciplinary research, including psychiatry, including psychology, including aesthetics, including cultural studies, including psychology. In my opinion, you absolutely deserve the academic degree you want to get. And once again, thank you very much for giving me the possibility to read your thesis and to get inspired. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Morgan. Let us continue the reviews. The next review by Professor Simon Morris. Simon, as all of us, published his positive review at the university website, and he's asking to ask one additional question, which I'll be glad to do, because I also would like to have this ask the same questions. So here are my questions. The first question is it, can one really imagine? This seems to be a paradoxical task for the artist, non-self. Is it possible to imagine non-self? The paradoxical task for an artist. A second comment of Simon: how Grigoriy Rafaelyevich has chosen his examples. Why Tchaikovsky and not Berlioz, etc. Simon, do you have other questions? No, I don't. No other questions. Thank you. These are Simon's questions. So now to read.
Так, все слышно. Он мне пишет, что доступен перевод.
Видимо, у нас какая-то сложность с синхронным переводом, поэтому...
Вообще
Okay, we can. Dear Father, dear Simon, we beg your pardon for the technical issues. Let us continue the session. Итак,
represent, представить, the absence of the self. And there are various compositions that I know of, musical ones like Sibelius, Tapiola, for example. This is a symphonic poem in which the composer tries to represent the complete destruction of the self in a catastrophic storm. And one of the things that Sibelius had a great deal of trouble with was representing your own disappearance, representing your own after-death experience. And so this is something that I thought about throughout this dissertation, is to what degree is it possible to represent this sort of non-self? And then, because the dissertation is so encyclopedic, I was just wondering why Grigoriy chose certain examples over others. For example, Berlioz is not discussed, but Tchaikovsky is. And I was just wondering how he chose the specific examples he did. I understand that he is a specialist on Handel and the oratorio, so it is natural that there was a lot of discussion of the oratorio, but I was just wondering about the choice of other types of examples. In general, however, I agree with my colleagues, with you, that this is a very substantial and provocative, in the good way, piece of scholarship, well-researched, and it shows more than anything that Grigoriy has an enormous intellectual purview and depth of thought, and so I think it is fully deserving of the awarding of the degree in accord with the Russian Federation regulations. It's great work.
Спасибо большое, Саймон. Еще раз прошу простить меня за то, что я чуть было не лишил вас.
I beg your pardon, not taking away, usurping your opportunity. And so I will focus only, in my review, I will only focus on, there's a lot in my review, and I'm not as generous as Mark Arkadievich. I shall look at some specific things omitted, in my opinion, by the author. I think that propositions set for defense, propositions 9, 10, and 11 are, there's nothing new. Next, introducing the concept of self from Charles Cooley, as George Mead, is wrong, in my opinion, since the concept of self can be ascribed to the 4th century, but the concept of self, the theory of subjectivity, the 16th century at least, and obviously in the context that Grigoriy Rafaelyevich uses, of course, he has the right to refer to Charles Cooley and George Mead, but I think is in the third comment, like the concept of matter, and again, idea of confrontation between good soul and evil body. And referring to origin, and this theme is not by origin. It has never been accepted by the church, and origin himself for this was sentenced in the 6th century, and on the basis of which Tolkien that referring to origin was said well. That certainly does not
it's certainly not true. And the next comment, what I also did not like, I didn't like on page 259, I did not like the new psycho philosophy theme, which the term looks ambiguous, but I fully agree with Maria Alexandrovna. The material on which any reader can have a great number of, and judging the work according to criteria applied by the Higher Dissertation Commission, and even more rigorous criteria applied by our university, I come to the conclusion, which I will allow myself to read. The thesis is written independently, has internal unity, having no scientific results and propositions. The text of the thesis and words published by the author testify of the personal contribution of Grigorievich Konson into science. The thesis on manifestation of the non-self-concept and the experience of catastrophe in European artistic practices of the 15th, 20th century corresponds to the main requirements established by order the 1st of September 2016 on order awarded academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the degree applicant, Grigorievich Konson, deserves to be awarded the degree of Doctor of Cultural Studies, specialization 340001, Theory and History of Culture, Article 11 of the above mentioned order has not been violated. Thank you very much. That's I have finished my review. Now I would like, I have to see if we receive any questions from the listeners, so that Grigoriy Rafaelyevich could answer all the questions together. So, is that okay with you? Yes, that's fine. We received only one question. Tatiana Anatolievna Tsirkovskaya, Orpheus Radio. Tatiana Anatolievna is asking, I'm reading. In your study, the section dedicated to music, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich touches upon mostly big pieces, instrumental, miniature, where non-self-concept is truly significant and typical. That's all. So this is the only, I don't see any other questions. Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, you have so many questions. Are you ready to take all the questions? I am trying to read. So I will try to answer the main questions, because with the number of comments I agree.
Можете через телефон включить и говорить через телефон, а слушать здесь, потому что
as promised. And if you allow me, let me answer in the alphabetic order. If that is, let me interrupt you. I don't see Anatoly Mikhailovich. So I suggest we take a small technical break. Otherwise, we will have to exclude him. Let us wait for Anatoly Mikhailovich to get back. The technical break is over. Let us resume our session. Thank you very much. With your permission, let me answer
questions in the alphabetical order, and first I will answer questions asked by the Dissertation Council members. They seem to be more important, more significant, critical, and then I will answer external reviews, questions asked by external reviewers, and questions sent during the broadcast by the listeners. So, well, first of all, I'm very grateful to distinguished chairman and council members for being interested in my work, insightful judgments, extremely valuable comments and questions. I will now try to answer some of them. I'll start with Anatoly Mikhailovich, Alexeyeva Praxin. I thank you for careful reading of my thesis about terminology. As I briefly said in my introduction, when to answer questions and comments by Wolfgang Masnak, our conception non-self, of course, is different from the Buddhist non-self theory, and how this conception is used in the Oriental discourse, which is regarded in the central intellectual tradition of India, China, Japan, Korea, and of course, historically entrenched meanings are different from those used in the study. However, it's not uncommon that for different cognitive practices, disciplines, or various theories, they use the same words, phrases, terms, concepts, and categories, and each time they can be filled with a different meaning depending on the circumstances, the subject of research, methodology, etc. The definition of non-self conception was articulated out of desire to assert and legitimize within the framework of cultural discourse a paired opposition concept stated in 1890 by William James Jacobson, which has been studied for 130 years, is not without heuristic sense of autonomous opposition. Non-self-conception, our own non-self-conception reflects an aesthetic phenomena, a reaction to catastrophe that occurs in life, and I think can safely coexist as a concept of the Western intellectual tradition, since it was formed mainly within the framework of the Christian humanistic tradition. Next, speaking of propositions submitted for defense, yes, thank you for your opinion. Partly I have already touched upon it. Now I'd like to touch upon this in more detail. Since this remark is similar to questions asked by other council members, I'd like to clarify my position, which maybe has not been clearly expressed. Of course, we are not talking about the formal tools, but rather about the fact that the non-I conception can be encoded in audiality, visuality, and verbality. Here, a significant role is played by the paradox of the non-self conception can be projected, highlighted, revealed, broadcast, and its projections in literature, in a verbal way, in painting, a visual way, or audio way. This is a study of a new phenomenon by purely traditional means in strict accordance with traditional ways of art. However, additional options are possible. Verbality of the literary text is ambiguous. As you know, it includes indirect speech, unsubstantiated, direct, indirect author's speech. Efim Etking in The Bronze Horseman says that Pushkin used all forms of speech to reveal different degree of verbality, memories, guesses, use all types of speech. Eugene and the Monument. Such definition of verbality, using this definition, I use in analyzing dialogues between characters, literary works. In music, of course, I consider the sound basis, where you have to listen for a long time in order to understand the means of its expression, and its own the audio component can be expressed only. So we can talk about musical poetry, and music has such plasticity that it can interact with any other form of art, can play any other role. So its audio nature in connection with other types of art remains original and often has a defining function. It's no by chance that they have chosen both symphonic samples, music with words, and music combined with images, such as cinema music. As for painting and sculpture, their natural visuality, which I differentiated into external and internal, it should be studied as such, so that when analyzing other artistic practices, such as cinema, pictorial, or almost visible musical images, for example, analyzing other artistic practices, we could discuss. But even within painting, visuality can be manifested in different ways. The distance between two types of painting can be much greater than between painting and music. And now, this in the new image of the world, as a result of which is perceived not as text but as an image, lack of direct perspective, the ability to see with the back of the head, the visuality as audiality is different, and each needs its own analytical approach. Next, I shall answer questions asked by Valerina Birukova. I'd like to thank you for carefully reading my work. The series of publications where I tested the ideas of my thesis touched a number of works of art from different periods, including contemporary works. However, in general, I set myself goals to analyze not only the 20th century, the art where it's visibly catastrophic, but also in the historical perspective, for which this period is a continuation and not innovation. However, in my future studies, I plan to study this phenomenon systematically. I'm sincerely grateful to you for focusing on the significant potential of my study. Let's proceed to the review of Maria Alexandrovna Burganova. First of all, I'd like to thank for an interesting idea and insightful opinions. I will let myself to answer the main comments and questions about the typical trends in visual arts. Of course, summing them up would enrich the text. I will take this into account. I'm also very grateful about your comment about I accept that is to get this homo sum et nihil humanum. So I accept your remarks about the question regarding about the mechanism of projecting the author's non-self conception in the works of the 20th century as tragic and grotesque. Thank you very much for your question. Indeed, it seems that in the 15th, 16th, the conflict between the tragic and grotesque in the non-self conception has already been exhausted, but in the 20th century, due to the increased author's reflection and increased catastrophism expressed in the two world wars, a new phenomenon is observed, merging of several types of this concept, the absurd, repressive, and apocalyptic. The result of this phenomenon affected the grotesque component in the Christological theme, and as a result, the mournful and tragic essence is connected with the appearance of Jesus. While the descent from the cross, the grotesque component disappeared, but in sculptures, for example, by Giacomo Manzu, the descent from the cross, the non-self conception is expressed in the incompatibility of the dead Christ and living cardinal. Is a certain curiosity, a soldier removing from the cross the body of Christ. In his serious variations of the theme, the image of the cardinal clearly approaches the image of execution or even of Adolf Hitler. Under the guise of confessions, he interrogates a partisan before his death in relief of the cardinal. In another story, his place is taken by an executioner holding a cigarette in his mouth or wearing a German general belt and helmet. The cynicism here is in the cultural divide between the human and inhuman, elevated to a degree, being embodied in the image of a portrait of a German general looking with pleasure at the crucifixion with the general. Further, I will answer questions, comments by Alexander Samuelovich Dricker. First of all, I would like to thank him. Unfortunately, he's absent because due to technical problems. Thank you for a careful analysis of my text. I'll try to answer some of them. First of all, concerning the actual relevant problems of humanity. Indeed, throughout its history, it has many times been spoken about decline of morals, corruption, illiteracy, and similar negative aspects. Our age is no different in intonation. However, this is exactly what I'm trying to prove in my research study. The motive, catastrophe, horror, loss of meaning, decomposition is of course articulated in artifacts, including the artistic one. There are differences in coding or representation which in our age can suggest both genetic selection and the aesthetic of artificial intelligence. Well, Lament of Yaroslavna and the motive of Lost Paradise are archetypal. The cultural dichotomy, of course, the binary opposition is one of the markers of European cultural, intellectual, and finally the philosophic tradition, which goes back to ancient Greece and post-structuralism. It also seems to be very plastic for scientific knowledge, including humanities, because within this tradition, this practice is a science with form. Next, I'd like to answer comments by Evgeny Anatolyevich Makovetsky. First of all, I thank you for your interest in the thesis, your insightful observations and valuable comments about Charles Houghton Cooley and George Gordon Mead. Yeah, thank you for this clarification. I will take it into account in my future work. As for Plato origins, understanding of soul and body, thank you for your fair comment. I didn't quite accurately articulate this idea. It was probably influenced by the authority of Origen, because his ideas, after he was condemned at the Second Council of Constantinople, was characterized by certain features of politicization, influenced the further development of Christianity. As for the personality of John of Damascus, amidst certain circumstances of his life, I would like to note that my judgment is slightly ironic, since in relation to a widely revered thinker such as Origen, John took a certain liberty, saying that God created soul and body simultaneously, and not as Origen used to say, one before and the one after. I'm quoting this phrase, from which in my judgment, it's a quite correct logical ellipsis, of course, so this we'll consider. Next, about the new word. Thank you for I agree, the term is probably not very good, but how to choose a more accurate version? This is a permanent problem for any researcher. Of course, in my future work, I will try to find a more accurate analog. Now, questions asked by Wolfgang Masnak. First of all, I'm extremely grateful to you for your high assessment of my work and for the ideas about the prospects of the interdisciplinary study deployment. All the remarks related to typos, mistakes, as well as structural, stylistic ones, I accept. Will certainly include them in the English text. Also, I agree with the comments regarding the need to clarify the terminology in the context of existing the Western academic tradition, interdisciplinary approaches. Here, I will also include the desire for contextual analysis in the historical and philosophical review. I will especially note the term no self-concept, revealing one of the facets of the main concept of my research really does not correctly convey the main meaning of the definition, since it focuses the reader's attention more on the procedural interpretative aspect rather than on the representative aspect. Therefore, based on your feedback and some other English-speaking colleagues, I came to the conclusion that non-self-contact would be a better definition. As for the components of the concept, yes, I or self is used precisely in the classical meaning is the theory of James, and non is the opposite of I, self. That is in the most concrete and effective role, and not thanks to transformation of self in its Buddhist understanding. The use of the term catastrophe in the thesis is really quite ambiguous. The main facets of the meaning here is disaster, catastrophe, in the sense of a destructive event and a personal disaster, personal catastrophe in the life of a particular person, as a result of which he experiences. This term means the emotional experience of a person of a fatal situation, the sense of experience with a focus on feelings or maybe emotional perception of bad situation. And here I will try to define the key concept of the thesis. The non-self concept is a conceptual concept of catastrophe expressed in the phenomenon of own other and possessing heuristic significance. The structure and mechanism of function in this phenomenon is formed by a system of conflicts, and its translators in artistic practices are internal images and their markers. In general, of course, the problem of academic translation of scientific texts, including introduction of new terms, adequate vocabulary in a foreign language, where own connotation, traditional standards significantly complicates the task of representing the study results. However, in many cases, thanks to the discussion of the English version of the text, it was possible to take a new look at the conceptual instruments in the native language. So I'd like to thank Professor Masnak for extremely insightful and detailed analysis. And answers to Simon Morris. First of all, I'm very grateful for high appreciation of my work, and I'd like to answer questions that came by in the course of today's discussion about how an artist can perceive or perceive the non-self concept in his consciousness and his mind. This question can be divided into two. First of all, we may talk about an artist, about whom another artist writes. Thomas Mann can live with his divided mind. He lives better, in inverted commas, if he lived without this division. When his mind is divided, he moves further to what the devil induces him. So what's the devil's reaction? Not bad, not bad. So even the devil is impressed by how he has taken by his advance. As for from the point of the author himself, the author who's writing, it's Thomas Mann or Balzac or others, I think here it can be divided into 2 points. first he can articulate in his mind this such division, takes him to representation of what is happening in his own life. Let me give an example. For example, an example which is not in my thesis. For example, Jack London has an interesting dialect. Everything that happens in your world is real. Hold on, he says. If I get drunk and I see devils dancing, does that mean that devils are real? Yes, of course. In your world, they are real. They exist in your world. That is why I would say that being from schizophrenizing the authors of the text, I think they got immersed in the states of their characters and could identify themselves with their characters, could reach perception or reinterpretation of the non-self concept. This is the answer to your first question. About your next question, why Tchaikovsky and not Shostakovich? Well, first, the question of choice is always there, no matter which work you choose. There is always a question, why? Secondly, it was very interesting for me to take up well-known but less studied oppositions and speaking of intonation, such works as overture fantasy. Tchaikovsky lived in conflict with the God, with the divine. He wrote about this, and he was scared because of his internal conflict rooted in his life. This is one thing. Secondly, look at fantasy, starting with choral. So this intonation basis is one of the facets of the chorus. Why he couldn't derive this theme. Tchaikovsky has hidden, not but let's take up such his legendary Seventh Symphony, the invasion theme. Where does it come from? It came from the Ekaterina Izmailova, so he sympathizes with Ekaterina. He has ciphered the author's position and his denial of this external repressive towards beloved hero forces, and on the basis of this he convicts the Soviet regime, because the theme which characterizes Hitler's army in 1930s, in 1936. So why through this we can look at his concept and unity of, but I can suggest that somewhere his models, political models, merged. So hopefully I have answered your questions. And as for Hamlet and King Lear, the situation is very interesting. I can tell about it in more detail. In addition to the abbreviation as Christ-like theme, the opposition. This is it is highly representative. Of course, the symphony by Berlioz is cool. Please forgive me this word. It's very, very interesting. It will be very interesting to take a look. However strange is the obvious reverse, the transformation of the main character, of his mind, because of what happens in his mind. So this is its idea has great potential. Thank you for this insight. But maybe because it is so obvious, though it needs systematic study, then maybe I left it outside the scope of my study. Thank you very much once again. Next. Question to Marko Kajusim. Of course, I'm very grateful for careful study of my work. I will answer some of your comments. For example, the theme of murder and sacrifice in Satanism. So thank you for your clarification. Next, as a remark about the pluralism of interpretation of literary works of foreign authors of the 18th century. First, I thank you for this clarification. Of course, in analysis of these works, different interpretations are possible. However, in my work, I was guarding the principle of necessary and sufficient, so the features that I primarily focused in my research seem to be more relevant. And about the contrast, I agree, accept your remark regarding the opposition during the Middle Ages and Renaissance, as well as some other as was said today, that non-self conception, catastrophe, these are two different, so maybe non-self concept is the essence of catastrophism. So that's a complex of catastrophe. So here I would insist on my opinion. Thank you once again. And it was very insightful and very important clarifications. Next, let me proceed to external reviews. As for alter ego, yes, this topic has not been considered by me because it is too extensive, so it calls for special thoughtful consideration. That's what I'm going to do in the future. I am very grateful to Olga Alexandrovna for her intellectual insight. It's nice that I apparently managed to convey to the academic community some of my most important ideas and to outline the research perspective. As for Kirill Emelyich Razlogov, and I'm very grateful for his review and involved in the description analysis of catastrophe. There's a wider range of composers who work in cinema such as Giac and Shelley to Isaac Schwartz, where animation film would be of particular interest. I'm very grateful for such an interesting idea, and I think in my future work I will try to realize it. I'm also grateful to Ekaterina Viktorovna Salnikova for a review who asked a question or comment about the use of the image criminal. Here's what I have to say. The infernal image of the criminal, I don't mean a universal, but a multi-component concept. The image of devil or his clone in human guise. I used classification of types of criminals, which is multi-sided, and as another semantic addition, I introduced the type of virtual criminal. I'm not talking about hackers, whose virtual criminal, whose actions committed in the moral and psychological sphere. In the for the material game, he, the devil of his virtue, whether he feels the pangs of conscience or not, provokes the victim to renounce morality, and in return receives a spiritual zombie. The danger of this type lies in the strength of his moral justifications of the hero's crime, the structure, the semantic core of the non-self concept. And by the way, in history, an ideal of such figures, negative propagandists of the fascist ideology, which Carl Gustav Jung in his work, I know that demons exist, actually called demons. And next, I'd like to touch upon very briefly to thank Natalia Tigravna Pagasaryan for her review and detailed considerations. I understand her remarks and will certainly take them into consideration in my future work. And finally, I'm grateful by Boris Nikolaevich Ruzhov, whom I would like to thank for this positive review, and thank him and other reviewers, and I mean chairman and members of the Dissertation Council and external reviewers who sent their reviews. And now there's only one question left by Tatiana Tsvetkova, which is a little unexpected. I did not know she was watching. She is my former doctoral student. She works channel author, so the author of some programs, an interest about instrumental representation of the non-self conception, but the instrumental works, I mean musical works of course, of the non-self conception. What examples can I give? Here the examples are new, could be many. Would be good to consider works which have some kind of a program, to consider the information complexes and their reverse. For example, I'm a violinist, as you know, so I will use what comes to my mind. First of all, for example, the obsession, as Jean Isaïe, is based on Bach prelude. This is built an intonation image with insertions of this could be 24th Caprice by Paganini, second Caprice by Paganini with reverse, the theme of a werewolf, Giuseppe Tartini. And if we look at other works, not for violin, could be Obsession by Pogosiev. And so this can be traced even in absence of a program. The program is a marker of what the composer had to say, thanks to the intonation analysis, what the composer wanted to say and how it could be interpreted and reinterpreted. The meanings that he put. If we talk about the intonation reverse, which allows us to rethink the piece completely, is a marker of non-self-conception. So here, maybe I tried to answer all the questions and comments. If I need to clarify something, I'll be happy to do that. Thank you for being interested, for reading my work carefully. Thank you very much, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, for your detailed answers. I have a question to Dissertation Council members. Is everybody satisfied with the answers? No, I'm not satisfied. So you want to ask something? I'd like to ask, or which, first of all, culture studies in modern world cannot say that in one area we decided, one place we decided, and we don't care what the rest of the world thinks. So what you answer to Wolfgang Mastak, that the non-self conception, we have our own non-self conception here in Europe. This is not true. We live in a global world. We use achievements of science. It's impossible to exit this cross-cultural dialogue, this discourse in a global world. This is unreal. That is why even if in the English version, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich wants to write the non-self concept, he should separate himself from this, because this concept for thousands of years had a different meaning. So this is my good wish. Please think of a new, different term. We have twin mythology. We have alter ego. We have psychology, mythology, religious studies, different. So don't use a term which has an absolutely different meaning in Jainism, Taoism, Buddhism, and other religions and philosophies. So this is my remark, my response to Grigoriy Rafaelyevich's answer. So thank you. Thank you, Vitaly Anatoly Mikhailovich. So this is for your information. You don't have, I don't think I have already answered in the conversation with Wolfgang that, of course, more cross-cultural interaction enriches terminology, but no self-concept is bad. Thank you. Thank you, Anatoly Mikhailovich. You have some field for cooperation. If no one else has other comments or additional questions to Grigoriy Rafaelyevich, let me proceed to the next point of our agenda, the speech of the academic advisor. And I invite Evgeny Georgievich Sokolov, professor of the Department of Russian Philosophy and Culture of St. Petersburg University, to tell about Grigoriy Rafaelyevich and his work. Evgeny Georgievich, please switch the microphone on. Turn on the microphone. Switch the microphone. Okay, now you can hear me, right? Thank you, Evgeny Anatolievich. So we've been here for almost 4 hours, and with all those breaks, so my review as well as the other reviews been published at the university website, the applicant's webpage. So everything that Evgeny Georgievich, we cannot hear you. Evgeny Georgievich, we cannot hear you. Evgeny Georgievich, could you please can you hear? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, we can. So we could not hear. So one sentence we missed completely. So that was the most valuable one. So what Grigoriy Rafaelyevich is a famous scientist that is already. Also, I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that today, what we heard today, or what we read today, this is natural evolution of musical studies, methodology of analysis of artistic text and fundamental cultural studies. So philosophy is even more fundamental. And just a couple of words about the key provisions, the non-self-conception and catastrophe. The non-self-conception, as can be expected, will be critically analyzed, and from I think that the non-self-conception of European mind, of the European mind, can you hear me? Of the European mind, and nothing before. Can you hear me? Yes, Evgeny Georgievich, we can hear you at times. At times we can hear you. Of course, this system is all it's archaic, of course, but it's traditional, and that it is its presence maybe is it can be seen as a disadvantage. In addition, I'd like to the contradictions, but not talking about contradictions, but the point of assembly, and I think that's here so this is one of the points of assembly, and in this light, it seems to me that during today's defense, this is one of the points. There were questions or opinions that maybe not only catastrophe as a non-self manifestation of the tragic, these are, but short, in the 20th century positive Lulu by Alban Peer is fixation of a different point, but so that's all I wanted to say, and of course we can discuss and we will discuss, but I have to. Evgeny Georgievich, I did not hear a question. So I have to say that he's a good, please say that he's a good man and that he has worked hard. It provokes discussion. Is that all? Yes, thank you very much. Thank you for describing the author. According to the procedure, now I have to ask, do you, dear colleagues, have any unanswered questions regarding the remote access mode? I think we have no questions, right? Next, let us proceed to the next point. And I have a question to all the members of the Dissertation Council. We will vote. Voting shall be public. I will call your name and you will say yes or no or abstain. So before this, we can discuss the thesis or we can proceed straight to voting. So please, shall we proceed straight to voting, or let's proceed straight to voting? Straight to voting. Anatoly Mikhailovich, what do you think? Straight to voting, or should we discuss? Considering all the circumstances, that is why let's proceed straight to voting. You understand our voting will be public anyways. It's a public anyways. Why? According to the procedure. session of the Dissertation Council. Voting is public. We can discuss in private, but then we have to give our opinions openly, but we have published our reviews. So you can give one opinion and vote differently. So let's proceed straight to voting. Mark Arkadovich, what do you think? Okay. So there is no break, and let us proceed to Article 12 of our agenda. Let's make sure everybody can hear, that we can all see and hear each other. We are 7 now. Okay. Now I put the question of awarding to Konson Grigoriy Rafaelyevich the degree of Doctor of Culture Studies, Academic Specialization 240001, Theory and History of Culture, to the open individual vote. Let me remind you that a decision of the Dissertation Council shall be considered positive if more than a half, but not less than 3 members of the Council voted for it, of those participating in this session, according to Article 23 of the order. In our case, Grigoriy Rafaelyevich has to get 4 positive votes. Let's proceed to voting. I will call names in the same order, call names of the members of the Dissertation Council in the same order, and you will please say I am for or against awarding the degree, or I abstain. For, against, or abstain. Okay, let's start. Anatoly Mikhailovich Alexeyev Apraksin, your opinion. Considering what was said before, and in the answer, what was to me is his concept, non-self concept is, I don't like his concept, but the text I didn't like. But if Grigoriy Rafaelyevich deserves Doctor of Culture Studies, yes, he deserves the degree. So your opinion is yes. Yes. Virtuoso. It's a real virtuoso. Marina Valerievna Birukova, your opinion? Thank you, colleagues. I'm for awarding the degree. I'm for awarding the degree. Thank you. Maria Alexandrovna Burganova, I'm for awarding the degree. Thank you very much. You see, Mark Arkadovich, your opinion? I'm for awarding the degree. Wolfgang Mastnak.
Yes, I am for awarding the degree.
Thank you. Professor Simon Morrison. Simon, I'm for awarding the degree. And me, Makovetsky, Evgeny Anatolovich, my opinion, I'm for awarding the degree. Now I have to count the votes, but I think this is quite easy. This is not a big challenge. So out of 8 members of the session council, 7 were present. Remember, Alexander Samoilovich had to leave. 7 out of 8 members, 7 took part in the voting. Out of 7 voting members, 7 voted for, no one voted against, and no one abstained. So the decision to award to Konson Grigoriy Rafaelyevich the degree of Doctor of Culture Studies, Academic Specialization 240001, Theory and History of Culture, has been made. Before, so this is the main part of our session. Now, before I give the floor for the closing remarks to the degree applicant, I have to ask once again if council members have any comments regarding the procedure of today's session, not the technical, but regarding the procedure. Do you have any comments, maybe objections? No objections. Thank you. Thank you. And now I'm happy to give the floor for his closing remarks to Grigoriy Rafaelyevich Konson. Thank you, Evgeny Anatolyevich. Thank you, dear colleagues. First of all, I'd like to express my sincere gratitude to St. Petersburg State University, where my thesis was prepared, and in particular to the Institute of Philosophy, which acted as a structural unit of the thesis, where the thesis was discussed and recommended for defense. In addition, I'd like to address warm words to Irina Vasilievna Alexeyeva, who, along with her colleagues, provided invaluable organizational support. I would like to cordially thank the entire Dissertation Council for my study, for fruitful discussion and benevolent attitude, and personally, the distinguished chairman of the council, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of St. Petersburg State University, Evgeny Anatolyevich Makovetsky, distinguished members of the Dissertation Council, Doctor of Cultural Studies, Associate Professor of St. Petersburg University, Anatoly Mikhailovich Alexeyeva-Praksin, Doctor of Cultural Studies, Associate Professor of St. Petersburg University, Marina Valerievna Biryukova, Doctor of Art History, Professor of Academy, of Stroganov Academy, Academician of Academy of Arts, Maria Alexandrovna Burganova, Doctor of Cultural, the Professor of St. Petersburg University, Alexander Samuilovich Bricker, Doctor of Philosophy, Doctor of Natural Sciences, Doctor of Pedagogical Sciences, Doctor of Medicine, Doctor of Scientific Knowledge about Sports, Professor of the University of Music and Performing Arts, Professor of Beijing University, member of the European Academy of Sciences and Arts and New York Academy of Sciences, Wolfgang Masnak, and Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of Princeton University, Professor Simon Morrison, Doctor of Historical Sciences, Senior Researcher of the Institute of General History of the Russian Academy of Sciences, Mark Arkadьевich Yusin. Your attention to the thesis, constructive comments, and valuable questions made it possible to clarify and in some cases to rethink a number of significant propositions in the further development of my research. Let me express my gratitude to scientists who sent external reviews. Doctor of Philosophy, Senior Researcher of Russian Academy of Arts, Olga Alexandrovna Lavrenova, Doctor of Philology, Professor of Lomonosov, Moscow State University, Natalia Tigranna Akhsaryan, Doctor of Cultural Studies, Professor Kirill Mirzhorogov, Doctor of Psychology, Professor of Moscow, Boris Nikolaevich Ryzhov, Doctor of Cultural Studies, Senior Researcher, Head of the Department Artistic Prose and Mass Media of State Institute of Art Studies, Ekaterina Viktorovna Salnikova. Remarks and considerations also contributed to clarification of the key points of my thesis. Many thanks to my academic advisor, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor, Head of the Department of Russian Philosophy and Culture at St. Petersburg State University, Eugene Grigoriy Sokolov, who took an active part in my research at all stages of its preparation. It couldn't happen without you. Also, I have to say warm words to the scientists who started preparing this study. The late Pavel Semyonovich Gurevich, Doctor of Philology, Doctor of Philosophy, Chief Researcher of the Institute of Philosophy of Russian Academy of Sciences, was the head of the Department of History of Anthropological Studies. And finally, I'd like to sincerely thank my parents, Irina Konson, and I'll remember the Union composers, and excellent student of Ministry of Culture, Rafael Konson, who not only gave me education, but also instilled lifelong love for it, actually teaching me to study. Later became the first readers of my works. Dear mother and father, I know you are watching this. Your advice is like reading my works as before before working on musical performance interpretations, the very first and necessary stage of public representation of my scientific and artistic texts. Thank you for your attention. Grigoriy, Rafaelyevich, thank you for your kind words. We sincerely congratulate you on successful defense of your thesis. Dear members of the Dissertation Council, on my behalf and on behalf of the university, I thank you for your patience, for your hard work, and especially for your patience, which you manifested today to overcome the technical issues. Thank you very much, and I declare our session closed. Thank you very much. Please stop online broadcasting.